Hello, fellow Dungeon Jedi Masters. Todd Moonbounce here with new show Galactic Basics. Here joined with Jawa. How you doing, Jawa?
I'm good. How are you, Todd?
Doing well. So we're here with a brand new segment to bring you guys some basics, a primer, if you will, on the Star Wars universe for any tabletop role-playing game out there. This information hopefully will apply whether you're playing the Star Wars 5e system or the FFG system or any of the older Star Wars tabletop games. This is essentially going to be a show about the basic aspects of Star Wars to help provide DMs a foundation for their own campaign and creating that story. As a rough example, if you maybe have only seen the movies, Star Wars movies, and you don't have a strong knowledge of anything past that, that's what this series hopefully will help with. We're going to start with one era, kind of work through that era of key dates, key events throughout that era. Look at key factions and key groups that are part of that, planets and systems that play key roles, and maybe get into some specifics such as starships and whatnot. Of course, it's something that would be very easy for us to just go down a rabbit hole, and so the core goal of this show is to provide a jumping off point to DMs out there to get a good basis and then do their own research and expand on their campaign and story. A few assumptions here for what this show, what we assume here is that obviously you are familiar with Star Wars enough. Even if you've only seen some of the movies, I think that's enough of a basis there. Not That's not even necessary though, but that certainly helps. Beyond that, you're obviously familiar with tabletop role-playing games, whatever system you're using, so you understand how that works and the general concept. As while most of this will be information on the elements of the Star Wars universe, we will touch on things that'll come into play with the tabletop, and it's just going to help you as a DM understand how to utilize this information. Lastly, I think we'll touch on that the canon versus legends argument, or that continuity. For the most part in this series, we are going to look at a non-canon, a legends slash non-canon continuity over canon, mostly because especially with our first era that we'll eventually be getting to, the Old Republic, there isn't a lot of stuff that is truly marked as canon yet. So just to be able to have the most breadth of information available for everyone out there. Yeah, that's how we're going to look at it. But of course, if you want to stick to canon, that's fine, and you just have to kind of pick out here and there what is going to be best for that. And I also think that for the most part, the information that we'll provide isn't going to be too specific to one or the other as well. It should hopefully be generic enough that you know it can apply to both sides of the things. So with that, I think we can kind of get into today's topic after covering what the show is. So today we're going to talk about the themes of Star Wars. What are the reoccurring themes? How are the stories kind of developed? What are the influences of Star Wars? So that if you go to an era that you're not familiar with, as long as you're familiar with some of those basics, you can create that story. You don't really need to know anything specific like that. So Jawa, we can jump into this and start that. A good little starting point, though, as we start working on our research on our end for this, is some basic knowledge or things that are that exist in the universe, that regardless of the era or continuity exists. So tell us about some of those basics that you're going to find no matter what in a setting.
Right. So, on the basic level, there's just a few things, not too many. For one, droids are all over. They're essentially just robots. The main form of currency are called galactic credits, and typically, usable anywhere, more or less. Technology is obviously prevalent in Star Wars. There's starships, droids, everything. But throughout the whole series and universe, it's generally pretty stagnant. Things tens of thousands of years in the past could be pretty similar to things in the future. Um, Especially thing to note is it's not totally science fiction. Um, Another thing is that the Force is very prevalent. It's which we'll dive into a bit later. But it's found in all living things throughout the galaxy. Um, Humans are often portrayed as the dominant species of Star Wars, although it isn't necessarily true. They're simply the most spread out throughout the galaxy. And with those things, I think that's kind of some key basic points that are worth noting.
Yeah, definitely. As long as you have those concepts, as we said, those are going to apply across the board. So that gives you a little bit of a structure as we go forward with the rest of this. So we got those ironed out, and you know, for those of us that have just maybe we've just seen the movies or whatnot, I think it's you could recognize or be familiar with the themes within those movies. Saving the princess or whatever, good guys, bad guys, things like that. But Java, expand on it for us. Kind of dive into what those themes actually are, and some of the examples of what those are, and that you find throughout the media of Star Wars.
Right. So if you boil it down in the broadest category, Star Wars isn't considered science fiction. It's not focused on the technology. That's all just a backdrop. It's generally considered a space opera or space fantasy because it's basically your classic fantasy story just in space. Um, and then going a bit deeper, it's at its simplest form again about good versus evil, or in Star Wars' case, light versus dark, which is most often represented in the Jedi and the Sith, two opposing religions who use a mystical power known as the Force to sort of sway the events of the galaxy in the ways they want it to. And everyone else is kind of just caught in between. It Star Wars has your classic knights, except they use laser swords. As Todd said, princesses that need saving, and most notably in the original trilogy, it has pure-hearted revolutionaries for the most part fighting against tyrannical overlords, trying to, you know, return democracy and whatnot.
Yeah, that's
Um,
definitely common themes that you see throughout Star Wars itself. And those are all basics that as a DM you can take those concepts and just massage them and change them up a little bit to make them fit your own way. Just really, you could take any of the stories and just change the names of the people, and really can kind of be your own story. Absolutely, because I think within the tabletop games, the story eventually is going to become its own story. You can set anyone that out there that is a DM already. I'm sure recognizes this or understands this, that players have a massive tendency to take your story off the rails, and I think personally that's I love that. I love when my players do take the little bit that I put together and make it their own thing. So start with the framework here, these basics, and go from there. So let's expand on this though, Jawa. So we've got some basic themes of Star Wars, but what else is out there? What are some of the influences that Star Wars looks to, or just what are in general some other things out there, other movies, books, etc., that DMs could look to for creating their campaign story?
um, right. Yeah. So, just a little bit before that, another thing that is worth mentioning, as Todd said, you can take other stories or expand, and it's just naturally going to happen in role playing games. But you can look at pretty much anything you want, right, and see it in Star Wars in some way. Uh, you could even see it as like a Wild West type series if you compare your cowboys being characters like Han Solo and all the bounty hunters, the Wild West itself being the Outer Rim, and the sort of wild or uncivilized people being generally Tusken Raiders. These are underlying themes that are there. Um, and there's plenty more. Uh, Religion, especially, is one of the main focuses of Star Wars. Uh, the whole series was essentially conceptualized around a sort of synthesis of pretty much every religion uh, out there, and it's sort of built into the foundation of the universe. Okay, so in addition to religion and all that spirituality and whatnot, another very prominent thing is feudalism. You know, as I sort of briefly touched on earlier, like chivalry, knighthood, paladinism, and other of these sort of older institutes in feudal societies are found all throughout Star Wars, most notably within the Jedi Order, with, of course, their Jedi Knights. Um, and like drawing from these things is very useful and very good to know. There's sort of a lot of one-to-one comparisons. Luke Skywalker is basically King Arthur, the main protagonist. Obi-Wan and Yoda kind of play the role of Merlin, who's basically a wizard mentor, right? Anakin Skywalker plays the role of Uther Pendragon, the father of King Arthur. And these mirror all throughout the prequels too. And I haven't looked into the sequels, but I would assume that as well. Except Anakin becomes King Arthur. So these are sort of things that can be drawn upon if you go and look back at them. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. I mean, that's you know that's a great example of a very strong, almost direct comparison to something out there that's, if you're familiar with that, you can bring that into your own campaigns. Another one, so that's kind of the religious influences. Another one would be cultural influences. There's definitely, I think the main one that we'll touch on here is the Japanese influences is extremely prominent in Star Wars. You look at, like Darth Vader's helmet is, if
Yeah.
anyone's familiar a little bit with kind of behind the scenes and influences of that and the fighting styles, you see where that comes from. But tell us how things like cultural influences can come into your story and your setting.
Yeah. So with Japanese influences in particular, you can see the most direct, as Todd mentioned. Darth Vader, he designed to look sort of like a samurai, just futurized. And the samurai warriors of Japan are basically a parallel to the concept of the Jedi, where they're an elite warrior caste who specialize in combat and swordsmanship techniques, and they're charged with protecting their societies. Um, so that alone, there's a lot of cultural draws there, just like from the various religions. But another big one is actually uh, other products that have come out of Japan. In particular, and sorry if I butcher this, but films by Akira Kurosawa had a huge influence on Star Wars. From entire like plot lines to particular scenes, and even the way a lot of the lightsaber duels in the OT especially are portrayed. They're very slow and graceful and lethal strikes. Very few. Whereas in the prequels, there are a lot of relentless, nimble fury, kind of more actiony. Um, like a couple examples are, uh, if you look at one of Akira's films, The Hidden Fortress, it's told from the perspective of two bickering peasants. Uh, and the comparison there is C3PO and R2D2. There's also a battle tested general who assists in leading a rebellion that is led by a princess. And he engages in a duel with a former rival who he had fought years earlier. And that's, of course, Obi-Wan. And there's other examples. Another movie, Yojimba, it inspired the Cantina Brawl. Senjuro, its sequel, inspired the whole hiding under the floor smuggling trick. And there's several other films by him that have been very influential on Star Wars. If you look up his films, I'm sure you could find comparisons all throughout.
Yeah, that's and the point here isn't, go watch all those films to gain information. I love the examples. Absolutely. I'm just kind of learning some of this stuff first time myself here, and it's great to hear that. And again, kind of the drive the point home here. This episode is look to what you know. If you don't know these Japanese films, that's okay. But look to what you do know, and utilize that stuff. That's it's as simple as that. So, let's look at a few more examples here of influences and what you can pull from. History, both ancient history and modern history, would be a great example of take real life situations in real life. I did a little side plot in one of my games for the party had to save a young Rhodian child who fell into a Wampa zoo exhibit. So that's kind of came from real life. It's as simple as that. But yeah, so tell us, Jawa, what about how we can pull from history for our campaigns.
Yeah, so starting with ancient history, you know, first off, pretty much anything in ancient history can be found somewhere in Star Wars. Um, but and as we already talked about previously, the feudal societies were one thing, but in particular, the Roman Empire is one of the most prominent examples. Particularly in the prequels, the Galactic Republic's transformation into the Galactic Empire mirrors that of the Roman Republic transforming into the Roman Empire in the same manner of conspiracy and manipulation, backstabbing, uh, and with Coruscant, the capital of the Republic itself, imitating Rome, the city, as the capital of the Republic and later the Empire. And there are other imitations like this with locations. Tatooine, for example, imitates the ancient Middle East and northern Africa as a very ancient and barren desert, which is sparsely populated. And then even just in architecture, like these are bit specific details that most people don't notice, but they're very inspired by things like ancient Greece, Rome, and other of the more Mediterranean, uh, societies, particularly on planets like Coruscant or Naboo, the more civilized locations of Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. What can we pull from looking more at a modern history aspect?
Right. So modern history is, along with religion, probably the biggest influences on Star Wars. Um, History as recent as 1975 influenced, the original Star Wars movie, which those who don't know came out in 1977. Particularly, it was the Vietnam War, with Lucas himself stating that Star Wars was really about the Vietnam War, and that was the period where Richard Nixon was trying to run for a second term, which got him, thinking how historically about how do democracies turn into dictatorships. They aren't always overthrown. Sometimes they're given away. So things like that, and then particularly with the Vietnam War, all the guerrilla warfare there would be the rebellion, with the organized governments being the empire, and so even just in terms of the politics and the social and the military ways, Star Wars is influenced by both modern and ancient politics. Um, and there's tons of other things, even just going back 30 years to the World Wars. Stormtroopers, very iconic in Star Wars. They share the name with the German stormtroopers of the First and Second World Wars. Uh, and the Galactic Empires, like their naval uniforms most often, uh, they resembled the German army uniforms of the era. So these things can be drawn from everywhere, and they are, especially even in modern times, and even a lot of terminology, such as Kessel, which is from a famous line on Solo states. It's a term that refers to a group of encircled forces, or Hoth being the last name of a German general who served sort of in the icy Russian frontiers. So things like this, and it goes all throughout, you know, history, and you can draw from this. Um, One of my favorite things to draw from, in particular, is the naval battles. Star Wars space battles are essentially World War One and Two naval battles, but in space, and it's a great influence if you go look up old footage or documentaries, especially. Um, can be great for this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of good stuff there with those influences, and it's you know, personally myself, uh, I definitely wasn't aware of all of this, aware of the concepts, but it's just it's so interesting to hear those direct correlations for sure, and then I think once they're called out, they're super obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, so those are some of the main things, the main influences that we see in Star Wars. Kind of pushing past, maybe going past Star Wars itself a little bit, but what might be, as we get close to kind of wrapping things up here, but what might be some other things, whether in pop culture, that DMs could reference that would be good for a Star Wars campaign?
Right. So really, anything can be good. You can draw, say, for example, from even Lucas's other films, Indiana Jones. You could have for Raiders of the Lost Ark, you could have a party go to a jungle planet. They sneak into a temple, get some kind of thing. They're ambushed, have to escape, so on and so forth. Or you can look at a lot of like old like pulp heroes and comics, especially like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, um, DC Comics, and all that stuff were huge influences. And even stuff like The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, even Star Trek, even though it's kind of controversial, our two fan bases. Lucas himself said it was a huge influence in the 60s on him. And another great one, which is quite popular in the sci fi community, is Dune. They have an insane amount of similarities. It's kind of like one to one in most ways. They have desert planets with a moisture farming based economy, spice smugglers, obese interstellar antagonists, mystical mind control using sect with great influence over galactic politics, and more. Um, the author of Dune himself actually listed like 40 similarities. So using other media, whether modern or recent, can be a wonderful tool, especially if it's obscure, right? Because not a lot of people are going to know these things. Or if they do, it might not be your players. So these can be amazing influences and tools to make your life easier and make your game more rich with content.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of touching on that last point, even if you utilize, something that people are familiar with, as long as you change things up enough that, and that might, that actually might help too, is if it is something that people are familiar with, maybe that helps your players get into the story better. I know that personally I've gone into a campaign and I knew nothing about the setting or whatnot, and that was a little bit at first, a little jarring because it was like, all right, I don't know the world or whatever, but if you start to introduce these concepts that are very familiar, like, oh, okay, I can recognize that. I can relate to that, and then that helps that character potentially, role play better and things like that. So, yeah, all great concepts there and things to utilize. I suppose kind of in conclusion here, really, as I said a few times, the point is to, look to things that you already know, themes, stories, whatever it is, TV shows, use an episode of Friends or The Simpsons or something, whatever, out there, maybe dating myself with some of those references there, but, you could probably find a concept within some of this stuff and throw it into your campaign. Anything else to that point to say about that, Java?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say something you mentioned, being familiar with it. Sometimes that's great for players because it's sort of like, hey, I know that thing, and people love that. And again, encourage looking at things you love, like even say, look at the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. If you take that but put it in space, it's the same thing.
Yep.
And you can do all these things to make such wonderful campaigns and stories for yourself and your players to have a great time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why I thought of this. Maybe a little bit of a Disney connection, but like Aladdin, the movie Aladdin, like
Yeah.
you could relabel that Star Wars all day, and so yeah, just take other things that you know out there and make them your own for your campaign. So yeah, at the end of this, going forward, I guess I want to touch on that. You know, this episode 1, is definitely going to be a little bit different than everything going forward. We've the concept for this segment is kind of a visual and audio campaign setting book, if you will. So we're going to provide the information on the setting, which is the Star Wars universe. We're going to go era by era, and then hopefully, 4, 5, 6 episodes in, you'll have enough base information to say, all right, I'm familiar enough with this era to start doing my own thing, and then maybe something sticks out and you say, all right, I want to learn more about that, because that's personally, as I've gone on my journey as a DM here, it's like, man, I just don't know anything about this era. Like, where do I start? That's the biggest thing. That's the question we want to answer: is where do you start? Hopefully, these videos are where you start as you look into things, and then you can expand on that and create an amazing, campaign and story for your players. So I guess with that, we can kind of touch on what we're going into next. So next episode, we're going to get into our first era. I think probably one of the most popular one for a tabletop role-playing game for many reasons, but that being the Old Republic. So we will look at the Old Republic era and dive into, we'll probably start with the timeline, key events and dates that happened through the Old Republic, to give you guys an idea of what are the key events, so that you can look at those and maybe you want to fit your campaign around this event or that event, avoid certain things. Start there with a quick calendar timeline, if you will, and go from there, as we said at the top of the episode, expanding on factions and groups like that that you can bring into your campaign, whatnot. So that's going to be coming up next. We are planning on doing this bi-weekly, so keep an eye out for that. It will be on the Dungeon Jedi Masters YouTube channel. We'll have a playlist just for this, Galactic Basics. We will very likely probably throw this down into an audio-only format. I know a lot of people like that, so throw it on the podcast as well. And, of course, if check out dungeonjedimasters.com for all of our other content that we put out. We definitely like to cross-reference across all that, everything we put out. And if you guys have your own input on today's topic or future topics for this as we go along, we'd love to hear the feedback and see how this helps you and your campaign. Jawa, you've got a couple links and resources that we'll throw into the descriptions as well that I think would be some additional material for today's topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're interested in sort of some of the concepts I talked about, you can find that in some of the links below, and sort of expand. And there's far more than we could ever talk about in a video. And I encourage looking into it if any of it interested you.
Yeah, absolutely. All good stuff. That's the main point. Hopefully this is a starting point and you guys can all take this and run with it. Go down that rabbit hole. The Wikipedia rabbit hole is easy to get into. So, but all right, well, that's it. That's episode 1 of Galactic Basics. We hope you guys have enjoyed, and we look forward to bringing this to you again. See you next time. May the Force be with you.
Always.